The General Conference for the United Methodist denomination was recently held in Portland, Oregon. Church members Lance Wilhelm and Tim Burkett attended the conference. We appreciate them making the trip, and we welcome them back home. Are they here? Yeah, I know. That's later. That's later. That's all right. I didn't mess up this time. Did Tim or Lance make it here today? I don't know. They've had quite a time out west, but we'll thank them later. I have way too many thoughts and emotions about the conference for me to give my thoughts about it right now, and frankly, I need to gather more information about it. But we will be talking about it in our small groups and committees, and then we'll keep you updated. If you have been on another planet for the last couple of weeks and haven't heard what's happened, let me give you a 2-sentence summary. The Council of Bishops has recognized that much of the language in our book of discipline is hurtful and needs to be changed. A committee of bishops will work on a plan and will call a special general conference when the plan is ready to be presented. We don't know how long that will be. Some are guessing about 2 years from now. My hunch is that it will be a pretty good plan, a progressive plan, but we honestly don't know if the plan will then be approved by the voting delegates. But anyway, that's where we are at this time. Now on to something more inspiring than the Methodist General Conference. We have an incredible birthday to celebrate. Many of you will remember Mae Johnson. Mae was from up north and came to Asbury in her older adult years, and just fell in love with this church and became one of our great greeters and lovers and huggers. And then she reached an age where she needed to move down to Florida to join her daughter. Mae is celebrating her 99th birthday. She there? This is her? Huh? Kate? Mae? Hey, Kate. Is she there? She's right there. Okay, hold on. We've got something for you. Is she there? Okay. Here we go. Mae, are you there, darling? Okay, here we go. Hey, Mae. Yeah, she said she'd know that voice anyplace. All right. All right. We go way back. We used to go to movies together, she and I. We were quite a pair. Here we go. We got something for you, darling. We'll sing loud. Here we go. Here we go, darling. We love you. Hold on. We got it. Okay, I'll put you on speaker. Here we go. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, God bless you. Happy birthday to you. We love you. We love you. And by the way, I've got you on speaker now, so be careful what you say, okay? Can you? We love you. Tell her we want to sing to her 100th next year, all right? All right.
Can you imagine? I can't even imagine.
She said she can't even imagine. Well, we love you. I'm giving you back to Linda, okay? But I'll talk to you later, all right? Okay. She's wonderful. Last Sunday, I ended the sermon by telling you a story by writer Anne Lamott. And during the week, one of our members emailed me asking for the title of the book that the story is in, and I thought it was in her book, Traveling Mercies. But I wanted to be sure, so I went over to my bookcase and pulled Traveling Mercies off of the shelf and started thumbing through it. And indeed, the story about Ken, the man with AIDS, and Renola, the woman who came to love him, was in the book. But then I saw another story that I had forgotten about, another good one of Anne's. It's in her chapter on forgiveness. And so instead of ending a sermon with an Anne Lamott story, let me begin a sermon with one of them. Anne said that she had never worked much on forgiveness, but felt compelled to do so. And so she decided to follow the advice of C.S. Lewis, who said, if we really want to learn how to forgive, perhaps we had better start with something easier than the Gestapo. So Anne decided to put everyone she had struggled with for years on hold. You know, her old boyfriends, teachers, some family members. She decided to put those on hold, and instead she would start this forgiving process with someone she barely knew, an enemy she had only hated for a short time. Anne was a single parent raising one son named Sam. Anne said that she had trouble adjusting when Sam started first grade. She couldn't seem to get the hang of things. She said there was too much to remember, too much to do. She couldn't help in the classroom much, not like so many of the other mothers did. Many of them were cooking treats for the class, driving the children on field trips. Mothers who seemed to have the time to be able to read all the papers the school sent home, which Anne felt gave them an unfair advantage. For instance, they knew from the first day of school that Wednesdays were something called minimum days, with school getting out 45 minutes earlier than usual. Anne somehow managed to make it all the way into October without figuring out this scheduling quirk. She wondered why Sam was always the only child in the classroom when she picked him up on those days. Anne's enemy found out about this. She was a parent of one of Sam's friends and classmates in the first grade. 2 days after Anne had discovered the scheduling quirk, her enemy showed up at her door, all bundled up in a down jacket because it was cold and because she was driving the kids on their first field trip. But that was not the crime. The crime was that below the down jacket, she was wearing latex bicycle shorts. She wore latex bicycle shorts every day. She weighed 80 pounds. She went to the gym every day. She didn't have an ounce of body fat on her. Anne considered this an act of aggression against all mothers who forgot to start working out after they had children. And another thing irked Anne about her enemy. Anne was a lifelong Democrat. And her enemy still had her Ronald Reagan bumper sticker on her white Volvo 7 years after he had left office. The day of the field trip, her enemy said sweetly, "I just want you to know, Annie, that if you have any other questions about how the classroom works, I'd really love to be there for you." Anne smiled, but thought such awful thoughts that it drove her to her knees in prayer. She prayed about it because Sam loved her enemy's son, and because Sam is so kind that it makes her want to be a better person, a person who doesn't hate someone just because she wears latex bicycle shorts. Anne prayed for a miracle and wrote her enemy's name down on a slip of paper, folded it up, and put it in a box she uses as God's inbox. "Help," Anne had said to God. On the last day of first grade, Anne attended the class party and ate some of the delicious cookies her enemy had made. The two mothers were mingling together. Anne thought they were making some progress, but then her enemy had to ruin everything by saying, "Did you bake anything?" Anne doesn't bake. Every time she's tried, it's been a disaster. She also doesn't push her son to read. Her enemy's son was reading proficiently, like a little Shakespeare in a Spider-Man's t-shirt. He is what is referred to as an early reader. Sam is a late reader. Anne would remind herself that Albert Einstein was a late reader and that Theodore Kaczynski was an early reader. It wasn't long before Anne's enemy took a special interest in Sam's reading. She began the second grade year by slipping Anne early first grade books that she thought maybe Sam could read. Anne went to the God box again, got the piece of paper out, and added an exclamation mark. Not long after that, Anne's enemy asked her if she had an extra copy of her latest book, a book Anne had written about being a mother. Now, George Bush was president when Sam was born, so Democrat Anne admits that she was probably a bit angry when she wrote the book. She said she filled it with her tiny opinions and that it basically turned into an anti-George Bush baby book. So when her Republican enemy asked her for the book, Anne tried to stall. But after her enemy kept asking Anne for a copy, she gave her one and signed it with all good wishes. A few days later, Anne bumped into her enemy at the grocery store. "I read your book," she said, and then she winked and whispered, "Maybe it's a good thing that Sam doesn't read." Anne was stunned. When she got home, she called a half dozen people and told them how her enemy had trashed her, and then Anne trashed her enemy. But then something strange began to happen. No burning bush, no cereal flakes dropping from the heavens, forming letters of instruction in the snow. It's just that God began to act like Sam I Am from the book Green Eggs and Ham. Everywhere Anne turned, there was a message about how not forgiving doesn't hurt other people as much as it hurts you. That it's like drinking rat poison and then waiting for the rat to die. Messages kept coming via fortune cookies, postcards, bumper stickers, everything but skywriting. But Anne kept feeling that she would not forgive her enemy in a box, would not forgive her enemy with a fox, not on a train, not in the rain. And then one Sunday, Anne read in the Gospel of Luke, "Forgive, and you shall be forgiven." Now, Anne tried to find a loophole in that, but she couldn't. It didn't say, "Forgive everyone unless they've said something bad about your child." It didn't say that. It didn't say, "Just try." It said, "Forgive." A couple of days later, her enemy's son came over to play with Sam. When her enemy came to pick him up for the first time, her enemy came in and sat down on Anne's couch and almost even asked her enemy if she wanted a cup of tea because, frankly, her enemy looked sad and tired. Anne thought she saw in her enemy a glimmer of kindness. But then her son came bounding out of Sam's room shouting, "I got 100 on the math test. Sam got 2 wrong." "Traitor!" Sam shouted from his room and slammed the door. Sam eventually forgave his friend. And not too many days later, he went over to play at his friend's house. And when Anne got there to pick him up, her enemy offered her a cup of tea. Anne said no, she couldn't stay. Anne was in her fattest pants. Her enemy still in her bicycle shorts. The smell of something baking, sweet and yeasty, filled the house, and Sam couldn't find his knapsack, and her enemy said once again, "Please let me make you some tea." Anne again started to say no, but something inside her made her say, "Well, okay." It was awkward. Anne silently dared her enemy to bring up school or reading, math tests, field trips, exercise, or politics. Anne just sat there sipping lemongrass tea, looking at all the fine, expensive things in the living room. Everywhere she looked, there was more facade, more expensive stuff, showy stuff. "I have more money than you" stuff. "You're out of shape" stuff. And then the boys appeared. Anne got up to help Sam get on his shoes by the front door, and as she loosened the laces, without realizing what she was doing, Anne sneaked a peek in the other boy's shoe, which was by the door. She looked to see what size he wore, to see how her boy lined up in shoe size. And that's when Anne finally got it. The veil dropped. Anne realized she was just acting plain crazy, that she was as mad as a hatter. She realized that she was the one who was worried that her child wasn't doing well enough in school, that she was the one who thought she was out of shape, and that she was trying to get her enemy to carry all of this for her because it hurt too much to carry it herself. And Anne wanted to go over and kiss her enemy on both cheeks and apologize for all of the self-contempt she had spewed out into the world, apologize for all of the bad juju she'd been putting on her enemy by thinking that she was the one doing harm. Anne said she felt like J. Edgar Hoover peeking into the shoes of his nephew's 7-year-old friend to see how the Hoover feet measured up. "This was me," said Anne. Her enemy was the one who was pouring Anne the tea. Her enemy was the one who'd been taking care of Anne's son. Her enemy was the one who seemed to have already forgiven her for writing a book that trashed her political beliefs. And after Anne had this revelation, she felt so happy, so blessed from her enemy and from her grace, that she almost got drunk from her tea. Jesus was constantly telling his disciples how important it is to forgive. The last thing he did before he died on the cross was to forgive. As Anne Lamott said, forgiving is not an option. It's something we need to do if we are to be followers of Christ. How can we do it better? Let me give you 5 quick things to keep in mind. First of all, we need to commit to forgiving. Now, that may sound obvious, but how often do we make a conscious decision and effort to forgive? So many times we think about forgiving, but never get around to it. Remember that old saying, unless you want to, you never will? Well, unless you consciously make a choice, make the commitment to forgive, you never will. Anne Lamott struggled with forgiving, but she stuck with it. She had a God box to help her focus on it, and she prayed. And so the first thought is to consciously commit to forgiving others. The second thought is to remember that our unwillingness to forgive someone hurts ourselves more than anyone else. We've heard people say, I could never forgive him for what he did. And they say it as if they're doing something that hurts the person. But in reality, it's not doing anything to that person. We're only hurting ourselves. As Anne said, it's like drinking rat poison and waiting for the rat to die. When we fail to forgive, a certain amount of angerness, bitterness, resentment creeps into our life and creeps into our soul and discolors it. We're in a prison, and the only way to get out of it is through forgiveness. It's not easy, but it's the only way to experience healing and wholeness and freedom. The third thing I'd encourage us to do is to examine our own lives. Examine our own lives. An elderly man went to see his doctor for a physical. You may have heard about this. The man said, Doc, I'm doing pretty well. I'm doing great, but I'm worried about my wife. I think she's losing her hearing. How bad is it? Said the doctor. Well, I'm not really sure, said the man. And the doctor said, well, it's hard for me to know how to treat her if you can't tell me how hard of hearing she is. I tell you what you do. Sometime when she has her back to you, stand across the room and ask her a question. If she doesn't answer you, take a step closer, ask her again. If she doesn't answer you again, step closer until she answers you. Then come back to me and let me know how far away you were from her. And it just so happened that night when the man got home, his wife was in front of the kitchen sink washing dishes, and her back was towards him. So he stood across the room and said, honey, what's for supper? Not a sound. Didn't say a thing. So he took a step closer. Dearie, sweetie, what's for supper? Again, there was no reply. He took another step closer and said, what's for supper? Again, there was no answer. He took one more step. He's only 5 feet from her, and he shouts, honey, what's for supper? And the wife turns around and shouts for the 4th time, spaghetti and meatballs. Anne Lamott would be the first to admit. Anne Lamott, some of you just got it. Okay. All right. Anne Lamott would be the first to admit that she wasted a lot of time and energy and emotions hating someone because she did not first examine her own life, her own fears, her own insecurities and biases and motives. It's so easy for us to blame someone instead of being open and honest about our own thoughts and feelings. When we do, it's amazing how much we learn about ourselves, how much we grow, and how we actually empower ourselves. And so before we look at the speck in our neighbor's eye, let's first take out the log in our own. The fourth principle has to do with when we really do get hurt and are harmed by someone. When we do get hurt and harmed by someone, it's important to forgive, but not to forget. I know that many of us, when we were growing up, heard the saying, forgive and forget. Forgive and forget. Not a good idea. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. That does not mean amnesia. That does not mean let's pretend it never happened. It happened, and the memory of it is painful. Too many of us, especially people who go to church, who have good hearts, often become enablers and often suffer abuse time and time again because we didn't know that we shouldn't forget. Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel says that the worst sin of all is to forget. And I think that's one reason some of us hold on to our anger and our bitterness. We think we have to forget, and we can't. But forgiving and forgetting are two different things. Forgive, but don't forget. And the fifth and last suggestion is to remember that our scars can turn into strengths. Remember Joseph in the Hebrew Scriptures, how his brothers turned against him, beat him, and sold him into slavery. He's taken to Egypt, where he ends up in prison. But as you probably remember, Joseph eventually becomes the second most powerful person in Egypt, number 2, only to Pharaoh. And there's a famine in Israel, and people have to go to Egypt for food. Joseph's brothers go to the leader in Egypt for help, not realizing it's their very own brother Joseph. And after playing a bit of a trick on them, Joseph shares his identity with them, and he forgives them. Now, of course, it's not good that Joseph's brothers did what they did to him. It was horrible, but that ugly situation was transformed into a blessing. And so if you have suffered by what someone has done to you, know that God is in the business of turning scars into strengths. Maybe a hurt you have endured will equip you to ease the pain of someone else who has suffered. By prayerfully reflecting on your scars, instead of ignoring them or wishing them to disappear, we can discover new opportunities for service, new opportunities for ministry, for empowerment. Many years ago, the New York Times had an article covering a talk by former President Jimmy Carter at a conference on aging. He was talking about the satisfaction he has had in his marriage of nearly 53 years and the things he and his wife have done to deepen and to enrich their relationship. By the way, on July 7th, in 7 weeks, the Carters will have been now married for 70 years. Well, at this conference, President Carter noted that he and Rosalind have had difficult times and plenty of arguments. Yet they've learned to forgive each other. He went on to describe one argument in particular that had gone on for days. We could hardly speak to each other, he said. We wrote ugly notes back and forth on our computers. I can't imagine that. Jimmy and Rosalind Carter writing ugly notes to each other on the computer. But finally, Jimmy went to his woodworking shop and he created out of a piece of walnut a check. I wrote on the check, "This is good for the rest of our lives, for an apology or forgiveness, whichever you prefer." I signed it and I gave it to Rosalind. She uses it frequently, he said. The Apostle Paul knew that forgiving others was essential. That's why he was constantly writing the early church communities and saying, "Forgive one another." To the Ephesians, "Forgive one another as Christ has forgiven you." To the Colossians, "Forgive each other just as the Lord has forgiven you, so you must also forgive." He knew that without forgiveness, our relationships will eventually wither and die. With it, everything is possible. Amen and amen.